Anna is on the call with us, everybody. Welcome, Anna.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. What's new? How are you?
If I look like I have been in a washing machine on spin cycle, I have been. It's been that way for the entire past week. You can tell by all of the international news that's coming out that I've had to bear down and spend extra hours working on the situation with the Treasury, with Trump, with the military. All of that has caused extra work for everybody in the Federation, and a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of extra strain and a lot of extra hours. So, not that we had that many extra hours to begin with. It's required a couple of all-nighters from me and certainly from Shannon, and we're feeling the loss of some of our elderly members, either because of illness or because they had to travel or, So, been short-staffed and overwhelmed, but we are here. And so far, we're holding our own. You all need to know just how serious this international situation is and how complex it is. The United States corporation that went bankrupt, that was the service arm of the municipal government, had many franchises, right? The upsets that we're seeing with Doge, they have to go through and conduct these audits of all of the federal departments that were part of the municipal government. They have to conduct audits of all of the municipal agencies. And that, of course, is hundreds of agencies alone, okay? And the number of federal departments isn't far behind. They have hundreds too. So you're looking at an absolutely mammoth fiscal accounting going on here. And at the same time this fiscal accounting is going on, they're having to make decisions about which employees and which functions they can and will maintain versus things that either whether they want to or whether they don't want to, they can't afford. Because remember, whatever the USA hires, they become responsible for. So they have to keep their budget and their purposes, their contractual obligations firmly in view when they're looking at these different municipal agencies and deconstructing them. So it's basically a bankruptcy liquidation / merger process going on here, because they will merge some of the current municipal employees and functions. They will merge into the USA Inc. Okay, so it's not just a straight across the board liquidation. If it was, we would be seeing a process where the department gets audited and then it gets axed. It gets audited and then it gets axed. It gets audited, then it gets axed. That's the way a straight liquidation works. But as you can see, they are not taking that approach. They audit and then they deconstruct, and they reduce the number of employees and functions, but they incorporate those functions into the USA structure. Okay, so anyway, it's a very complex, very time-consuming action that they've got going, and they themselves indicated that even with the computerized systems, trackers, and all the tech that Elon Musk can bring to bear, that it would take them at least a year and a half to complete. So they're looking at it as a year and a half project. It may take 2 years. Nobody really knows until they go through the process. But anyway, it's likely that at least a significant portion of Trump's term in office will be taken up with settling the municipal bankruptcy. And there will be a lot of money saved, but there will also be a lot of employees on the street. So, as I've said from the beginning, we're looking at between half and 2/3 of what we know as the federal government being gone. Just poof, no eyebrows sort of thing, where suddenly, there's no longer a department of, or there's no longer this particular agency. There's no environmental protection agency, or what it is completely scaled down. Um, so you'll be seeing some real blood in the streets and a lot of crying and whining about all these employees being let go. Um, but there's really no help for it because remember, the USA Incorporated just itself is in the throes of settling out a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, a reorganization bankruptcy. So basically the only way that they have to really claw their way out of their own reorganization is to latch on to our assets again and try to brave it out so that we don't get our assets back out of the mess. And so it's my job to bring forward our claims and to make sure that that doesn't happen, which is a full-time job in itself, quite apart from having to, bring up the unhappy fact that the United States Corporation also had many, 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 many different franchises worldwide. Like the UK Incorporated is a franchise of the bankrupt United States Corp. Germany, in all caps, is a bankrupt United States Corp. France, in all caps, is a bankrupt municipal United States corporation franchise. And all of that has to be audited too. So when you think about it, you can better understand why all these quote unquote European leaders are just absolutely in a state of desperation, trying to figure out a way to absorb the cuts and keep their own economies and their own governments solvent enough to limp along and make it through. And they are indeed they're at a point where they believe, whether they're right or wrong, that the only way that they can remain solvent is by starting World War III. See, they're looking to benefit themselves and make profit from war profiteering because that's the only way they've been able to dig themselves out with World War I and World War II. People don't realize it, but this was all about economics and banking also. So this has been their way of digging out from under the bankruptcy and out of insolvency, is to start wars. Now, obviously, this is not a good thing for the human race, and obviously this should not be going on. But that is nonetheless what the operators of these bankrupt European franchises are trying to do in order to muddle through all the disruption and the auditing and everything else that, the loss of employment, everything that will go on there too. It's hitting us first, but it's going to hit those franchises in other countries also.
Now, when the dust settles and the cleanup, of the municipal government is completed, or the subcontractor, is it going to be made apparent that now they've joined forces and they're under the British territorial system? I mean, how is that going to affect? I mean, this might not even be well known yet. So I'm just wondering, is it going to be evident that there's now only one federal subcontractor sort of having this umbrella of whatever agencies are left over by the municipal, whatever they decide to keep?
So far, they haven't been very forthcoming about these quote unquote private details. That, you don't see Trump saying, hey guys, I'm settling a bankruptcy, give me a break, right? He should say that. But instead he's trying to make political points and letting people think that he's choosing to do this just because he's such an all-around, upright guy. And what he should do is just admit that it's all part of the bankruptcy settlement and that he has no choice in the matter, and that it's causing all these disruptions and chaos and problems and layoffs. I think people would be more understanding if he just was upright and out front, and there it is. It's certainly what I would do if I were in his position, because then everybody would understand what was going on. And, if I didn't make any political hay on it, it wouldn't matter, because people would still be grateful and happy that it was getting done.
Although they would probably freak out at the idea that the government could be going bankrupt in the first place. I think that alone would probably be a massive wake up call for a lot of people. They would be like, wait, what do you mean bankrupt? How could that possibly be? We're the greatest superpower in the world, right? So that would be a huge shock to, Main Street, basically, right?
Well, they would have to understand that it's a corporation that's going bankrupt. They'd have to understand that the country doesn't go bankrupt, isn't bankrupt, and can't be bankrupt by definition. I was asked to write an article, and I will certainly try to get to it, explaining why it is that a corporation cannot be the actual government.
Great. That would be a very helpful article. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the only kind of entity that can go bankrupt is by definition a corporation. And on top of that, it has to be a public corporation. And what do I mean by that? It means that the public owns that corporation. So if the corporation goes bankrupt, you get to pay its debts off. And so they're trying to set this up so that we get stuck paying the debts for the United States corporation. And the only exception to that is if the United States corporation acted in bad faith, and we demand that the corporate veil be stripped. Well, if they strip the corporate veil, then the individual franchise corporations that they set up under our names will also be bankrupted in the process. So it's kind of a dual-ended disaster. It's a trifecta of damned if you do and damned if you don't. My preference is to strip the corporate veil and hand the responsibility to the perpetrators of the scheme. And that means that the Pope and the British King would both get a gigantic bill for their disservice. So anyway, these are things that we struggle with here every day in terms of, what do you have to do? Who do you have to contact? Where do you post notice of it? How do you do this to ensure that no matter what happens, the American people get the best deal out of it that's possible? We may not be able to manage 100%, but 90% is a lot better than none. And what they had planned to do was to leave us with none. So both those corporations and the principals in back of them have acted with immense bad faith over a long period of time, and they've gotten away with it, so they think that they can get away with it again. And as time goes on, they're very slowly but surely coming to the conclusion that no, they can't just get away with skating and pretending that we are British territorial subjects. It's just not going to wash. Too many people know the facts now, and more people are learning on a daily basis, and more people are waking up simply because all the activity in the external world, all of the talk about Doge, all the talk about the situation in Gaza, all the talk about what's going on in Ukraine. These are huge public interest topics that are engaging the people on a scale that has been, it hasn't been seen in many, many years. Everyone's concerned that the European, I will say it, European desperation and desire to start World War III so they can dig themselves out of their economic hole is pathetic, but it's also very dangerous. This the possibility that we would wind up on the other side, that we would be fighting against Europe, is a possibility. The the way these things work out sometimes is very it's a crapshoot. You walking into, you don't know what to expect. Everybody's got hold cards. Everybody's got secret fears. Everybody is scrambling around. And let me also say that the best interest of these corporations that are running Germany and France and all these other countries are not necessarily aligned with what's good for the people. So, that too is just thrown up in the air. Poland has a very, very good government. They have a very determined leader who is very practical. And so they're lucky that he is not being swayed and he's not allowing Poland to be just conscripted into the European effort. My recommendation to President Trump is to bankrupt all of those franchises that take those bankrupt municipal corporations and just begin the gutting process now. And that'll give them something more to think about than playing war in Ukraine. Now, I'm not against the Europeans forming their own national governments again. Obviously, that is to be applauded, desired, encouraged, pushed as fast as possible, so that the people there can gain control of these corporate governments and stop all of this self-interest and bully boy tactic stuff and get down to living again. It's just as important for France to form up its national government as it is for Germany to finally resuscitate its national government. But I'm talking about the corporations that have usurped upon these different national governments and the kinds of reckless, self-interested, for-profit racketeering and warmongering that these corporations indulge in. And so when I'm saying, for example, Germany or France, I'm talking about the corporations. I'm not talking about the nations. And the national governments are what need to be brought forward. So the people themselves have got to bring their national governments forward and use those national governments.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Anna, we had a hot mic over there. I got it.
So anyway, all of this warmongering stuff is very, very concerning. It's something that, the Federation, we don't have many worries about Mr. Trump going off in the wrong direction on that. But we certainly are concerned with the kinds of duplicitous, backdoor, nasty, usual skullduggery by the British. And the British have been very, very sneaky. They've acted in bad faith once again. They signed a 100-year friendship pact with Ukraine, and they simply took it for granted that we would provide the security agreement underlying that agreement with Ukraine for them, so that they would gain control of all the rare earth minerals, and it would be our blood and our money and our armed forces that would be fighting with the Ukrainians and preserving the borders of Ukraine for them. So once again, the Brits were out to use us, and Joe Biden went ahead and signed this $500 billion, basically a grant to Ukraine. And so now Donald Trump is coming in and canceling that. They'd already managed to siphon away, 3/5 of it, and they are only able to account for 1/5 of it. But at least Trump was able to cancel on 200 billion of it. So then there's basically 2.3, let's see, 230 billion of it that's lost, missing. We don't know what happened to it. Yeah. So just immense amounts of graft, immense amounts of embezzlement, immense amounts of siphoning off of these NGOs. And it's been going on for a long time. It's been bleeding us dry. On top of which, we've been underwriting and guaranteeing all these other countries. And basically, franchises have been providing them with both defense services and civil service for free, or almost free. And this is all a holdover from World War II, when these corporations got set up and began providing the governmental services in lieu of the national governments being restored. So basically, the British began operating in this unlawful and undisclosed manner. And then they brought it to the United States and the Commonwealth. And then in World War II, they foisted it off on 17 European nations that had been occupied by the Allies. So, and everywhere they've gone, Japan, Libya, Iraq, and now they have their sights fixed on not only Ukraine, but Iran. And if they can possibly foist it off on us, they want us to go to war with Russia for them too. At which point we say, no, sorry.
No, you've said many times that we've been allies with them all along, you know,
You
so.
say so.
Worth it. Honda Whisper, an inverter as well.
Hi, Shannon.
Good morning.
Are you interrupting Anna, Shannon?
We've got an interruption.
Oh, I can just get on my phone and shut it down.
No, please don't do that.
No, we have an emergency here.
Yeah.
One of our big generators went down last night.
Oh,
So we have to buy a new generator, and it's been a real pain in the butt, both financially and in terms of manpower having to be switched on to fixing that problem and finding a new generator and all of it. So that's what he's taking care of right now. Begging posture.
right. Yeah, I think everybody heard that. Okay.
Yes, we're having a hard time. But anyway, if I were Donald Trump, I would be changing the focus somewhat from the domestic front to beginning the auditing process on all those municipal corporations in Europe, and giving them something to think about. I think that Trump has found some worthy allies in terms of the economic situation in India and Japan. The real enemy here of all people is Britain. And that's very regrettable because, you know, we all like the British people, but their government is so infinitely perfidious and dishonest, deceitful, unstable, disloyal, self-interested, uncaring, and they're that way to their own people too. I mean, nobody on the planet has been as devastated and has suffered the kind of depopulation from war that the British Isles have. If you stop and think about it, they lost an entire generation in the First World War, and we're already in a very steep population decline when barely 20 years later, the Second World War began. And then another generation was decimated. And during the same time, the populations were suffering from famine, from perpetual poverty, and they were still expected to give the proverbial stiff upper lip and go out there and give their all for what? Great Britain and the British Crown, for the Queen, for the King, for the money, 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 money. And so the Brits have suffered their government as much or worse than anybody else. So let's be sure and, you know, make a distinction in our minds between the British people, who have been defrauded for 300 years, and the rotten, wretched criminal government that they've had to endure, and which has foisted its tentacles onto the rest of the world.
Yeah, colonizing all over the world, right?
Right. And if
Yeah.
they couldn't colonize directly, it became such a political hot potato. Everybody put thumbs down on colonialism. But did the British stop? No, they simply changed venues, they changed jurisdictions. And so
Mhm.
instead of the colonial empire, then they switched over and changed, unlawfully converted everything into a different jurisdiction, and then proceeded to create corporate feudalism. But it was feudalism just the same.
Right.
And instead of there being an actual monarch who was liable for all of this, they foisted it all off onto a corporation which couldn't be held accountable. So they thought, oh, well, this is a good thing. And what's even worse, in my opinion, is that not only have they pulled all of these con games and stings and constructive frauds and weaponization of the justice system and all these other evils all these years, but now they're trying to escape through the back door by doing another jurisdictional change and entering in the jurisdiction of the air. So they're trying to change their offices and change their personas and enter a different jurisdiction and exonerate themselves for all responsibility and all debt that they have created in the jurisdiction of the sea. They're trying to enter the jurisdiction of the air and wash their hands and wash their debts away by doing so. And this becomes more obvious when you see that the Pope has taken on a new title as the Patriarch of the West and has set up a new deal, if you will, and a new détente with the Eastern Orthodox Church, obviously, and that King Charles III has been crowned as an emperor in imperial jurisdiction, which again is air jurisdiction. Now, nobody seems to know whether the Pope is dying or dead or recovering. Nobody seems to know. There's a whole lot of talk. There are a lot of different cardinals being run through the paces to see who might be a new Pope. There are at least a couple major contenders. I don't think either one of them are fully aware of what they're stepping into if they inherit that office or if they continue to try to act as popes, There's also a big shakeup in England. King Charles has said that he is resigning. I don't know how many people have heard that yet, but he actually said, I resign. And so there's been a huge reshuffling and chaos and concern and what does this mean? Is he set on this course that he's going to resign? Can he retract that? Does this mean that his son William automatically then becomes king and we're facing another whole coronation event and big brouhaha in England?
Mm-hmm.
Most likely, yes. So both of those offices are, like shoes thrown up in the air.
Well, it begs the question too, in regards to Space Force, and not only Space Force, but also, Elon did all the stuff with the satellite system and sort of, I don't want to say weaponizing, but with the technology that they have now up in the sky, it's like a giant spider web of connectivity.
Right.
And, they're taking control over a physical jurisdiction in this way. And I'm wondering if it has anything to do with what you're talking about with the Pope and the king, former king.
The sky, the
Uh-huh.
air,
Yep.
Space Force is their jurisdiction.
But do you think that they're working together on that? I mean, in other words, do you think that the US military under this Space Force, are they working with the Pope and quote Emperor Charles?
Well, you have to understand about the air jurisdiction. The air jurisdiction, think of the air, the atmosphere blanketing the whole globe, right? So the air is everywhere. It's over the land, it's over the sea, it's completely
global.
global, okay?
Right.
So there is an air to land connection and an air to sea connection, okay? Now, something that came up here, a lot of people still confused about how the treaties that um, ended the Revolutionary War were then implemented by the constitutions. Okay? And they're confused about what are called treaties series. All right? So if it is something to do with the land and land jurisdiction, which is international, right? Then the treaty series is Treaty of Versailles. If it's a sea jurisdiction treaty, it's a Treaty of Paris. If it's a maritime jurisdiction treaty, it's a Treaty of Westminster. And if it's a land jurisdiction to air treaty, it's a Treaty of Ghent, Ghent, Ghent being a city in Belgium. So anyway, you've got these different series of treaties that are used as a means of organizing the different jurisdictions and treaties within those jurisdictions. So land is Treaty of Versailles, sea is Treaty of Paris. The air to sea is Treaty of Westminster, and the air to land is Treaty of Ghent. Okay, but this then shows you that the air jurisdiction has these two subsets. There's air jurisdiction at sea and air jurisdiction on the land. And you have to account for both, right? So you have a situation, for example, Space Force, you have land jurisdiction that connects to that, right? But you also have sea jurisdiction that connects to that. And since we already have a situation where, remember, the British territorial government got its foot in the door with us and got a sea jurisdiction treaty, the Treaty of Paris 1783, which left them with all of their investments here intact and gave them a contract to provide services on the high seas and navigable inland waterways, which
That's 1789
I've
Constitution, right?
Yes, that the 1789 Constitution was the implementation of the 1783 Treaty of Paris between our government and the British government. So you see there's a treaty first, and then there's the Constitution. There's the treaty, and then there's the implementation of the treaty.
Thank you for putting that, connecting that information. That's so helpful. Okay,
Yeah,
keep
well,
going. Sorry, Anna.
It all does make sense. It's all logical.
Yeah.
But you have to sort of sort it out in your own mind, and you have to have someone kind of taking you by the shoulder and saying, oh, see how that works? Because each of these treaties has its implementations, and they often involve different players. You know, our Admiralty is our Admiralty. The British Admiralty is the British Admiralty. And yet, because we have an agreement, a contract with them, implemented by the Constitution of 1789, which is their contract, they continue to have a disproportionate influence on the U.S. Navy.
Right.
And they will also have an influence on Space Force because of the maritime jurisdiction, the sea to air jurisdiction. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have our own jurisdiction, which is land to air. We do. And that is the true jurisdiction of commerce. So we also have our, our version of commerce. See, they call there's maritime commerce and ours is just plain old commerce. Okay, but anyway, those are both the sort of subset jurisdictions that connect the sea to the air and the land to the air. And I want everybody
Wow.
to understand this stuff so that I'm not the only one conversant, okay? I want everybody to get this.
Well, it's important too, what you said, to help us understand how the treaties came before the contracts, the employment
always-
contracts.
Yeah,
So that's hugely important. And for people on the call tonight that are coordinators for state, your state coordinators, the state, of course, is in international jurisdiction. So it's important for us when we have these little missing pieces, like for me, that was a missing piece. I didn't realize that the Constitution was as a result, the different constitutions were as a result of these treaties. That
right.
was a missing piece for me. So it's like, every time you teach us, more and more gets filled in, but it makes sense now because the constitutions didn't come out of thin air. They came as a result of these treaties.
Right.
This is really important. Yeah.
There were quid pro quos that were
Mhm.
established in the treaties that had to be implemented in just, they had to be implemented in fact. And so the constitutions, which are service contracts, from our perspective, we were hiring vendors to provide us with these certain essential government services, is how Article 4 puts it.
Yep.
So we were hiring. And these treaties dictated, what kind of little plums of vendor gold was going to be spent on, a reciprocity with the British and a reciprocity with the Pope. And so that's why we wound up with an American federal subcontractor and a British territorial subcontractor and an Holy Roman Empire subcontractor.
Yep.
So
Wow.
anyway, if you want to look at it, you've got the Treaty of Versailles and you've got the American subcontractor that was known as the Federal Republic that was operated by our Confederation of 1781 that was doing business as the States of America, upper lower case. Okay, so there's that whole progression. Then you have the Treaty of Paris, 1783, and the Constitution of the United States of America, meaning the British territorial version. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. That's fine.
But, and finally, you have the Air Jurisdiction Treaty. So you've got both the treaties of Westminster and the Treaty of Ghent to cover both those eventualities in air jurisdiction, leading to the Constitution of the United States.
That's the 1790.
The 1790.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, in order to track back to see the treaties, you have to be aware of the Treaty of Westminster is maritime. That's the sea to air. And then Treaty of Ghent is the land to air treaty. You have to have both of those in order to make sense of what went on in the implementation via the Constitution of the United States. Anyway, I wanted to make people aware of that. Oftentimes people get part of it and they are trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. I can't count how many times people have brought forward the Treaty of Paris, 1783. And, they see in there that the king is still the prince of the United States of America. And they immediately read those words and they think that, well, nothing happened. The Brits, maintained their clause and he was the prince of our United States of America, because they're unaware that there are two. And that one is a corporation and one is unincorporated. One is a British Crown Corporation franchise and one is a country in international jurisdiction. So there are things like that that people need to know so that it makes sense. Otherwise, you've got all these bizarre theories. I'm sure that people have seen these people that claim that Britain won the war of independence and blah, 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 based on their understanding of the Treaty of Paris. But they don't know that Treaty of Paris is a sea jurisdiction treaty. They don't have the connects.
Yeah. Well, you connected that for, there might be people on the call that already figured that out, but you really connected something tonight, Anna, bringing the two, not, there's more than two, but bringing the treaties and explaining how that led to the contracts,
Right.
the constitutions, so no, this is an up leveling for us for sure.
Another thing for people to know is that contracts overstand virtually everything else until you get into high-level ecclesiastical law. So their obligation to the constitutions is their highest level of obligation within the land-sea relationship.
Okay.
We oftentimes are talking about agreements, but if it's an agreement, the contract is more binding. So if they make an agreement among themselves, as they do when they legislate codes and all that, codes, statutes, regulations, ordinances, mandates, public policies, all that stuff that they legislate, that's at a lower level than the Constitution, which is an international contract.
Right.
So that's why the Constitution overstands all this other legislated stuff. And, that's all across the board. Contracts always overstand all legislation.
Well, yeah, and the fact that a lot of the legislation that goes through these statutes and codes and rules and regulations and policies and procedures and all of it, so much of what we see is actually unconstitutional, but there haven't been appropriately educated people in their proper capacity to enforce the contracts.
Right.
But as we're learning now, who would be accountable for having the enforcement power to communicate with which agencies and which departments and which, employees. I forget the name of that one article, but you broke it down for us, like when it's appropriate to bring in the Federation on matters that relate to international issues, and or when it's appropriate for a coordinator to get involved, and bridge the gap. So I'll have to look up, someone might even